Good evening. How is everybody? Everybody's good? All right.
Almost
Looks like
spring break.
pardon?
It's almost spring break.
Almost spring break. Oh boy.
Almost. Woo.
Almost. Almost. Yeah, I know. I don't get breaks though. Doctoral students wear me out. Oh Lordy. We work weekends with them. We have weekend classes, Saturday and Sunday,
Mm.
or Saturday, sometimes
I
just
do.
Saturday. But yep, they wear you down. I can tell you that. Uh, okay, back to my view. All right, welcome. This is Mel 603. This is Zoom session 11. We're getting into short rows now. So we're off next week. When you come back, we'll have your fourth and final case study. We'll talk about it tonight in depth because it's a booger. It covers everything, starting with master schedule. The very first thing that we worked on this semester in the OMA, what teachers teach what, where, when, and why, and the master scheduling, and then all the way over to the skip long term, where we're trying to develop communication for the purpose of having long term. And so it's going to cover all that and everything in between. It's going to talk about basic ed, like with Leandro. I mean, it's everything. The inclusion model, EC. It's a booger. So we'll talk about it in depth tonight. We're not going to spend a lot of time on anything else. All right. So here are the stars of the week. All right. So in discussion board 15, you had to review the chapter and come up with the things that mattered to you. I like Tommy's. They were all about being champions for students. I don't see Tommy's with us tonight, but Randy's already finished CAP task 1. Did a great job. RJ, good job on that one. Tanya was kind enough on her discussion board post about Title IX and sexual harassment to post the brand new, spanking new policy from Winston-Salem Forsyth. And it is great, by the way. It incorporates all the latest Title IX revisions. It has in there that administrators can't do investigations because, Title IX said you can't be the one that does the finding and the investigation, that it has to be central office, it has to be somebody exterior, that you're not qualified. How many years I've been trying to say that, but finally somebody listened. And so if you want to see a great modern Title IX and sexual harassment policy that has who you report to and who's responsible for each piece, you need to read the one that Tanya posted on that discussion board for Winston-Salem. It's excellent. Emmy made a great point, and thank you for this, Emmy, because sometimes I'm old and I forget stuff. As you know, this sounds kind of dumb on my part, but you know me. The calendar year and the school year don't match. We go half of one year and half of the other. But when laws change, guess what? They change with the calendar. So what happens is, Emmy pointed out, benefits and EAP and those kinds of things can change mid-year. And you've got to stay up to date on those, because January 1st, all the laws change. And a lot of those policies on benefits and compensation and those kinds of things change mid-year. So you've got, as an administrator, you got to keep up with that stuff. That's a great catch, Emmy, on that one. Thanks for reminding us that benefits can change mid-year, and you need to keep up with those changes. Liz in last night's group said that her school didn't have a facilities checklist. If your school doesn't have one, you better make you one. You better be intentional. And we're going to talk about facilities in a minute, but I want to remind you the purpose of the facilities checklist and doing those checks is to keep kids safe, not the building safe. Yes, we want the building itself to be safe, but the purpose of that is for kids. And sometimes we don't make the best decisions on that, but we'll talk about that more. But Liz made a good point is if you don't have one, you better make you one. And it needs to focus on keeping kids safe. Melody did a good assessment, and hers was very thoughtful, and so I appreciate that from her. They put a lot of thought into it, walked with the principal, and they talked and thought and looked how they could make things better. Brandon and last night's group brought up that their building is under construction and there's a fence and it's causing them some supervision problems. I need for you to remember, and we'll talk about this more when we talk about facilities. The construction guy's job is to get buildings done as cheaply and quickly as possible. They're not about student safety, and they will do dumb things. And so you have to work around them sometime, but don't think that they have the same interest in mind as you do. And then Carolina talked about her AP didn't know how to log CEUs from college courses. I guess that's okay, but it's not okay if you don't know who in the central office to talk to about that. It goes back to those benefits and assisting your people. I mean, you can't just say, I don't know how to do that and walk on off. I mean, that what you're saying is you're not important or I don't care about you. I don't care how trivial it is, and in this case, it's for their CEUs, for their reimbursement, all those kinds of things. That matters to teachers. What you're saying is you don't matter to me, and that's kind of the whole notion of benefits and compensation and those kinds of things. You need to follow through on that stuff. If you don't know who you need to get them to somebody who does, because if it wasn't important, they wouldn't have asked you. So that's important to them. So let's talk about the assessment inventory. And let me start out with one of my stories. This is absolutely true story. I told you I was asked to go and assess a new facility, a new lockdown facility, a new middle school in south of Siler City, right there off 421. And I told you I went, and the building was bulletproof. It was the first one I saw that had the doors and it had a containment area, so people got in. You could lock them in the middle of the doors. They couldn't get in school. They had electronic entry and all that stuff, except all the kids were standing out in the yard right next to the driveway. The building was safe, but the kids weren't. And so that's how I want to start talking about our assessment inventory. You need to look at it more than just putting checks in the boxes. You need to be thoughtful. You need to be intentional when you're walking around. What can we do to make sure our kids are safe? Of course, the first thing, as you know, is the traffic area. Now, somebody had said their SRO stayed out front with cars, which is probably a good decision. Let me share screen. But you need somebody of authority, and that would be like the principal on both lots, because parents and cars will just ignore the cones and people waving. Don't dare put a kid out there in the vest and get them run over. You got to keep the cars and buses separate. Everybody's in a hurry, and everybody and his brother's got to bring their children to school now. And so the cars will duck into the bus line, trying to dump their kids off and not wait because there's a line out the driveway. But you need somebody that with authority that can stop cars from doing crazy stuff. Now, I did the car line as high school principal to try to keep it somewhat safe, and I had the resource officer on the back lot with the buses. But either way, somebody in authority, because the day you're not there, if you're not there, they think the rules aren't there. That they've done the same thing for the last 6 months, but the day you're not there, then the rules don't apply anymore. And so you got to make sure that you have somebody with authority enforcing. I don't care how many signs you got or how many cones or kids out there in traffic vests. They will pay them no attention. That's just modern life, folks. So you can't just say, well, I signed a kid out there. They just ran through. The kid held up the stop sign. They ran through the stop sign, ran over another kid. That won't play in court. You better have an adult with some authority out there, making sure that even though you've got things clearly marked and signage and cones or whatever, that somebody is enforcing traffic to do as they're told or directed to do. Separate. Don't have kids walking through buses or cars. The reason I had the SRO out on the back lot is the way our lot was done is the buses would pull in and start unloading, and the kids, instead of getting off on the sidewalk, they'd go running through the bus lot, around everybody else. They wouldn't get on the sidewalk and do as they were told. And so I had resource officer and several teachers out there making sure that they didn't come, the buses pulled in one way and unloaded on the sidewalk where the kids didn't go between the buses and get out in the yard there and get run over. So don't just assume because you've got signage and cones or whatever that people are automatically going to follow the rules. They won't. And so I would not have crossing guards. That would not be my deal unless they were adults. And even then, I'd make sure they had some authority to make sure that adults paid attention to them. Directional signs, cameras. One of the posts is that the principal had put in a couple of work orders for a camera that wasn't working. I'd put in a work order every week if I had a camera that wasn't working. Every week. That'd be my first thing I'd do on Monday morning. If the camera wasn't working, I'd put another work order in. If you're responsible for that and you know that it could be a problem, I would follow through it. They'd get tired of having to answer my emails, or they'd come and fix it. On the doors, a lot of the more modern facilities now have the keypad entries, but that uses the teacher's ID to let them in. And so it doesn't look like a very big deal when teachers aren't wearing their ID tags. The problem is that's the very one that props the door open because they're going out and they know they can't get back in because they didn't have their ID. They don't wear their ID, so they'll prop the door open on you. And so it doesn't matter that it was only propped open for that time, for that little bit of time, it was still propped open. And that's when access to your building can, having all that security getting people in, they'll find a door if it gets propped open. And so indirectly wearing your ID tag, if you're one of those facilities that uses that as a keypad, key card entrance, that means that if they go out, they're going to have to prop a door open to get back in. So that's why you make them wear their name tags. Chains, locks, all that stuff, can't do that. Supervision, again, make sure your front office, we talked about this before, is not, Grand Central Station with everything in the world. No discipline, no package deliveries, none of that in your front office, where your front office staff can watch who comes to the front door and be intentional about who they let in, and not just when it buzzes, they just reach up and hit something and let the door open because they're busy dealing with a kid standing there bleeding. We don't do first aid in the front office. We don't do discipline. We don't do package delivery. We don't do any of that stuff in the front office. We need to make sure that front office is business and those people can, all the best security, physical security in the world, isn't any good if somebody reaches up and pushes the button and lets a bad guy in because they weren't paying attention, because something else was literally a kid was standing there bleeding. Again, we need to make sure that we understand our front office has to be a place of business. And part of the job of that staff is to make sure we don't let bad guys in. Classroom doors being locked, that's a biggie. We know in the last shooting in Uvalde, they went to the room with the broken class. They went to a cafeteria, went back of the kitchen where they propped the door open, set a fan in it because it was hot, walked in that way, got in the building, went to a classroom where the door was locked, and went in and killed all the kids. We got to make sure that we don't prop doors open and let bad guys in, or we let them in because we're not paying attention in the front. And when they get in, we got to make sure that the kids are locked away safe as much as possible. Clear lines of sights, control points, communications, mirrors, doors, good working conditions, doors to places that kids don't need to be in, need to be pick proof. Have pick plates, make sure your custodian doesn't leave them propped open, make sure your custodian keeps the chemicals up off the floor. I told you Garinger, they put a screen in the cafeteria and put all their chemicals right there on the floor in the cafeteria so they wouldn't have to walk back to their closet. You can't allow stuff like that. My story is from Druid Hills. I was doing a pre-audit because the state was coming to audit them. They were on the persistently dangerous watch list. They were getting a state audit. The state auditor was coming. I went and did the pre-audit with them, walked through with an AP, opened up a chemical storage room, and there sat a 9-year-old kid at a desk, locked in the chemical storage room. And he said to me, "It's okay. My daddy works here." His dad had custody of him that week. His mother was out of work and was going on vacation. They didn't cohabitate. So he had to bring him to school. He didn't have any child care, and so he locked him in the chemical closet. I can't make that up. The AP, that was the end of her, and of course the principal got moved, and the school district paid out because of course the mother sued because the dad was an employee of the school district, locked her kid in a chemical closet. She sued and won. That's the kind of stuff that we're talking about. Everybody needs to know the rules. There's a reason why there's no access to those rooms, why there's pick plates on those doors. That means everybody stays out except for the one person that's authorized to be in there. That's not a made up story. That happened at Druid Hills. And that's not unusual for something like that. Everybody's got to know the rules, and we're trying to keep kids safe. It's not just we're putting in rules just to aggravate people. Fire extinguishers, you need to check behind those people, even though you got people in your central office that do that. You need to check behind first aid kits, chemical storage, ventilated, fire evacuation plans are posted, bomb threats, signs, all those things, ladders, cords put up. I mean, anything can be a potential danger. You've just got to make sure that the whole purpose of what you're doing, the entire purpose, is to keep your facility safe and to keep the kids safe inside the facility, more important. All right, so Dr. Griffin Jordan, who normally works with me, she did this quick and dirty on managing facilities. I like it. I don't normally go through and read these, but this is kind of a summary of some things. It's got some good stuff in it I want you to see. Here are the dimensions of facilities right here. Occupant health and safety, implementation, evaluation, and planning. We won't talk about that because normally school people aren't involved in capital planning. Training and managing staff, learning environment, stakeholders needs. So what do these things mean? All right. So occupant health and safety, that's the main thing for facilities in terms of this assessment. Scheduled drills and inspections are done on time. Again, don't assume that they're going to come and make sure that your first aid kits and your fire extinguishers haven't expired. You need to check those when you do your regular walkthroughs. You need to check and make sure that those have been done. Your school improvement team needs to be involved in this so everybody knows why we do what we do. They can help you, especially the parents, with traffic control, getting parents to understand that we have these rules for a reason. You know, your safe schools, your safe space, your critical response, which is your crisis kit, all that stuff is done. Make sure you're doing your drills, you know, fire drill monthly, your bi-weekly inspections every 2 weeks. As I said earlier, if you're getting renovations or updates, understanding that those construction people, their job is not to keep kids safe. They'll do things that put kids at risk, and you may have to modify your supervision schedule or what you do with kids. I tell the story, it's absolutely true story. I was principal up in Burke County, and we had a pod building, and we were building a wing onto it, a primary wing. And the plan is to build the wing and then do the interior demolition into the hallway. And of course, the construction people came one weekend and knocked our end wall out because it was a lot cheaper. And then, oops, we got it wrong on the construction sequence. Our bad. And all we had in the wintertime was a piece of plastic. We about froze to death. They don't care about kids' health and safety. They're just about saving money. They knew what they were doing when they tore the wall down. They were supposed to build the wing and then do an interior demolition. That's very expensive. So it was cheaper just to bring a loader up and knock the wall down and then build the new building on it, not have to do all that interior demolition. Save them probably, $250,000 to do that. And they just, oops, our bad. And I was like, what are we supposed to do? Well, you still got to have school. And so that's the kind of stuff that I'm talking about. Brandon talked about they put up a fence at their building. They're having to take kids out to the road and get around it now. Well, you better have some staff taking them, leading them by hand if you got to go to the road. They don't care about safety. They're just trying to make things easier and cheaper on them. And so if you're doing renovations or updating your building, it's never going to go well. Make sure you do your safe school training with your teachers, keep them up to date, and make sure your code of conduct reflects that, kids aren't supposed to be where they're supposed to be, when they're supposed to be, that you're not allowing them to be in dangerous areas. You need to look at your teacher working conditions survey for feedback on your facilities. That's one of the things that you have to do when you do the CAP that we just started on. You need to monitor that data and look at what teachers are telling you about the facility. Got to make sure that you're doing that. That's the best feedback that you can get. We don't do much capital planning. We do need continuous feedback from staff and students. We need to be looking at our data to keep our schools and our buildings safe. Again, teacher working conditions survey, we won't talk about that, but we know that money for facilities comes from the local. And so none of the rest of that stuff. Most of the time you won't be involved in planning for facilities, but if you are, if you get a seat at that table, understanding that it's local money and that, they're not going to write you a blank check. They're going to save money, and many times they're going to put you under the gun in terms of student safety while that construction is happening. And you need to be aware of that. All right, so that's that one. We've looked at the assessment inventory for facilities. There's some other documents here that are wonderful. And you can look at any of those that you want to. All right, we're a little ahead of time. We're doing well here. So now I want to look at case study 4. Now, case study 4 is a bear. I'll tell you before we start. And so here it is. That it's in Chile is immaterial. It's just to throw you off. All right. And part of this is we have these problems, and all don't get bogged down in that it's a Title I school, 60%. We have these same issues in all schools. And so here's kind of the background on this. The PTA is concerned that there's how well their school is performing on standardized tests. Most particularly, they're upset about the inclusion program. So let's start right there. And I'll stop my share. We'll talk a little bit here. Remind me what the difference is between an inclusion program for exceptional children and a mainstream program for exceptional children.
One is when they're included, like in specials, they stay in their classroom and then they come to specials like music and art.
All right,
That
so
is
mainstreaming. They have their EC classes together. They go to the EC teacher. They have that class, and then they're mainstream for art, music, all their specials. That's the mainstream. But when they get their content classes, they're with other EC kids, and they go to the EC teacher's room. All right, what's the inclusion model?
The EC teacher pushes into the regular classroom.
All right, so they're mainstream totally in every class all day. And the EC, instead of them going to the EC teacher, the EC teacher pushes into their regular class and provides support for them in their regular classroom. So that's the inclusion model. We talked about that on our EC module. So this case is about that. This school is a Title I school, could be in your community, that has the inclusion model. Now, what the parent association, they want to meet with the principal and they come in. All right, what's the first antenna that should go up when they say, PTA says, we want to come and talk about what's going on in this particular teacher's, I think it's Miss Sylvia. Let me go back and look at that.
Yeah, Sylvia.
Yeah. Eugenia is the principal, Sylvia is the teacher. All right. All right. What's your first concern when somebody says, I want to come in and talk about what's going on in a classroom?
Is there an ulterior motive?
Well, yeah, that. But think about the legal aspect of that. Just like when in our last case study, when the parents came in and wanted to talk about Jimmy and Willie.
You can't do it. You can't speak with anybody outside about another student.
There you go. That's your first issue. Now, I'm not saying you don't have the meeting with them, but you understand that you need to set the parameters for that meeting is we'll talk about your child, what your child is doing or not doing. But now we can't talk about other people's children. That's a FERPA violation, especially if they're EC. We can't talk about except, and see, now they're complaining about the EC kids being in the room. So not much way that you can't talk about EC kids if they're coming to complain about EC being in the room. So that's going to be your first problem. Now, thinking about, so that involves master scheduling because they're all in one room. Should we have put all the EC kids in the same room? No. That's when we let teacher input overrule federal compliance. Remember back to the first thing we learned about master scheduling in school, there's a rationale. Federal law, state law, local board policy, performance scores, and then finally number 5 is teacher input. In a school like this, what system did they use? Number 5 was number 1 in this school, wasn't it? That's your first problem. All the EC kids are in the same room. Shouldn't be that way, should it? But that was
one thing that has been real tricky at our school too, because they've decided to go, well, the district is wanting to move towards inclusion in the elementary level. And well, first of all, you just don't have enough staffing to do it the correct way. But
yeah.
One area that's been real bad is not only did the administration put all the EC children in an inclusion class, they also tacked in all the MTSS students in there.
Yep.
So these poor teachers, I mean, we've already had 2 resign who are doing inclusion, which honestly, I don't blame them because, I mean, I teach special education, but I have 10 in my class, not 15, 16, 18. So
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Bad master schedule, didn't follow the rationale.
Yeah, it's harder to serve them when they're all compiled like that, especially when you got to follow all the different plans and all the different, it's a lot.
Yeah, it was convenience of the adults and not what was best for kids and following the federal law. And so, so that piece bumps in on this as well.
And last year at our school, when the inclusion happened in the 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade, K2 is still mainstream, but 3rd, 4th, and 5th was inclusion. We had started with we had 10, I think, in the 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade 2 years ago as a mainstream group. And then when they were put into inclusion by the end of last year, we only had 3 of those students left at our school because their parents had moved them out because there were so many MTSS behavior issues. They were, once again, you can't suspend them every time they get in trouble. There's just all these, and there were just so many issues. And it's not a 3rd grader's fault that they were put into that situation.
Right.
And like you said, the teachers, when the regular ed teachers were not trained on how to handle any of that or how to teach, them. And so just pulling out for 15 minutes during a small group twice a day was just not enough, just not enough support for those students.
Yeah. But again, when you put them all together like that, you create an unmanageable situation. And to Kristen's point, Liz said the same thing last night, Kristen, that they've already had 2 teachers resign because of that, just piling them in. And you got all of them. But now a point that I wanted to make, even if you could suspend them, you can, but what if the kid manifests? Have we talked about that? You change their placement for 10 days, whether it's suspension, in school or whatever, or you go to the manifest on the 3rd time showing a pattern. What if the kid manifests? Now you can't suspend them because it's a part of their disability. And so when you put them all together, you're just creating a nightmare for yourself. but you know, you got to follow the protocol of how to schedule a school legally, ethically, properly. So obviously they didn't do that in this case study. Now, the regular ed parents are coming to complain. Now, some of them might have AIG kids. And we'll talk
Because
about that.
it says down in the one of the
Yeah.
paragraphs that the AIG or some of the students who
Yeah.
were being asked to teach some of the
Yeah.
other EC
So
students.
that's what I'm talking about. You think that's in their IEP? Of course not. So we're malpracticing on both ends, aren't we? Now, what about the middle group? What did Leandro say? Every kid's guaranteed a basic education,
Basic
right?
education.
Remember that case study number 2.
Mhm.
So we're violating the IEP of the low kids, the EC kids. We're violating the IEP of the AIG kids, and then the middle kids, the basic ed kids, aren't getting a basic education. Wow. It all started with a bad master schedule, though, didn't it? It all started with a bad master schedule, and then it just got worse. It just got worse. All right. She came in, and these parents are talking to her about the school. What if the first thing you notice about her? You think she's doing any walkthroughs? Does she know what's going on in Sylvia's classroom? Not a clue. Probably couldn't find it. Probably had to get the custodian to help her find Sylvia's classroom. Never been there. Don't know what's going on in the room. What did we learn last semester about walkthroughs? You got to be doing those walkthroughs, know what's going on in the room. No walkthroughs.
And she asked the technical coordinator, I don't know exactly what IF, is that an IF?
Yeah. That would be your instructional facilitator.
Mhm.
She sent them. Still didn't go. So great day. Now, let's skip ahead to the end of the skip. The whole purpose of the skip is develop some communication, but not just to communicate. The purpose of the communication is to hook those parents so we can get them in and do some parent nights with them. What should be the content of a parent night? Well, what about inclusion night, where we explain the inclusion program? What about professional growth plan that comes for the, we're going to educate our parents, but what did we learn last semester before we do anything else? What do we got to do? We got to educate our faculty. You think there's been any professional development on the inclusion model? Probably not. Teachers don't know what they're doing. Parents don't either. And we're not serving low, middle, or high kids. We're violating IEPs on the low and highs, and the middles aren't getting the basic education. Great day. Teachers don't know what to do. Parents don't know what's happening. Principal's not in the room. Is it a best practice to have the high kids teach the other kids? You say, well, the best way to learn something is teach it. No, they're doing remedial work. And so I told you I had, he's head of school at Pine Lake Prep now, going out of 115 out of Davis into Iredell County. At Pine Lake Prep Charter School, Andrew Masseri is head of school there, but Andrew was when I had him in class a few years back, he was I think he was head of one of the schools, but now he's head of the entire school. But he said, we don't have any gaps. All of our kids come to us already on grade level. We're a charter school. I said, yeah, but they get the dumber. The longer they stay with you, the dumber they get. Look at what happens to those 4s. They become 3s over time. You're just warehousing them. See, that's what happens when you have the high ones work with the low ones, because you're just doing remedial work all the time. Are you growing them at all? Of course not. So this notion of, it's, if you have them having the high ones teach the low one is not cooperative learning, by the way. One of Marzano's 9 high yield strategies. So that links back to last semester too, doesn't it? High yield strategies. Are we using those in the classroom? Having the high ones teach the low ones might look at first glance like cooperative learning until you stay in the room for about 5 minutes, and then on a walkthrough, and all of a sudden you realize that's not cooperative learning. That's the more advanced kids doing remedial work with the lower kids. Is that helping the high kids at all? No. They get dumber the longer that they stay with you, unfortunately, because they're not growing. They're not keeping up.
And she says in the last paragraph, Sylvia does that, she gives them special activities. And for the ones in the middle, she prepares and distributes workbooks.
Yeah, gives them worksheets. They're just
Yeah.
sitting there. I mean, are they getting is worksheets a basic education? No. We're malpracticing on the bluebirds, robins, and buzzards, all three groups in here, aren't we? This is a worst case scenario. As I told you, this encompasses everything that we've touched on since you, not only in this course, but we can circle back to last semester, to our growth plan, to our walkthroughs. You know, you think they're using data dives to drive instruction for this group? Of course not. They're using worksheets for the middle kids while the upper ones work with the low ones. This is completely dysfunctional. This is not what education is supposed to be about. This is about everything. I told you in the first case study, y'all were mad that the teacher was the bad guy, that we'd get to one where the principal was the bad guy. I told you that. Well, this is another one. The principal's the bad guy here. And you can say, well, maybe the principal didn't make out the master schedule. Whose responsibility is it to make out? So it starts with a bad master schedule and it just goes bad from there. Principal's not doing walkthroughs. Principal's not making sure that they're doing best practices in the classroom. Not working to professionally develop the staff to be able to do an inclusion model, not having parent meetings that to the point they're having to come and ask her what in the world's going on in my kid's classroom. But now, unfortunately, this is pretty much standard. This is what we see a lot of, and we wonder why we don't do a good job educating kids. I mean, there's a way to do things the right way, and this is pretty much everything wrong from beginning to end on this. Pretty much everything is wrong, and so you can work through the. Let me share my screen, and we can work through some more. But here's the things that you need to focus on when I get down here to the bottom. How might the principal approach this in future meetings with their teachers? Is it necessary to choose one approach over the other? Well, of course it is. You got to tell them what you want. This is what we're doing. This is how we're going to do it. But, you know, she's let the teachers browbeat them into making the schedule that they like, not what's best for kids. What's the path she could take? Is one point of view more correct than the other? Yeah. What kind of collaborations might the principal and the teachers propose in order to improve the inclusion education program? You know, what about a family inclusion night? What could the instructional facilitator do to get to iron out some of the differences, opinion among the teachers? I want to circle back to that. And that's where I want to kind of conclude this rant tonight. I told you about when I'd go to the principal's meeting in Charlotte, and they'd have a big stack of stuff, and I'd have to go through it, make 3 piles. First pile's FYI stuff. It'd go in the dumpster right outside the back door there at staff development. Didn't even bother to take it back to school. The other 2 piles that I took back, one was we got to do it this way. We got to do it now. For fidelity, we have to implement it this way, and there's no options on this. And I would just go to the faculty and say, we're going to do it this way. And then we'd have some things that were up to us how we wanted to implement it, when and how. Very few, but we would have some of those. So the inclusion model is not one of those that you get to pick how and choose how and what. There is no differing opinion. We're going to implement this program this way. This is the only way that it works legally. This is how we have to implement this with fidelity as intended, or we're going to be out of legal compliance. You have to understand that you don't have options when it comes to federal programs. They tell you what you have to do and not do. Why would a school administrator think that they would have any discretion on implementing a federal program? I don't understand that. But that's why I said that D word gets you in trouble. That's a dirty word, that discretion. Well, we did it this way because the teachers wanted to. I don't care what they want. We have to do what's legal. Well, they won't like it. I didn't like it when my hair fell out. I had to get grown and get over it. This is we can't run school for the convenience of teachers because they don't worry about laws and policies. They only worry about what's good for them. I don't hate teachers, but now teachers will lead you down the garden path. You're supposed to be the adult in the room that makes these decisions. Exceptional children is not something that there's any discretion or wiggle room in. Kristen does it for a living. And Kristen, I'm quite sure, will tell you, they don't ever send you stuff and say, what do you think we ought to do? That's not the way the feds do things. If we're sending you the money and the personnel, we send you the instructions on how we want it run. That's why federal programs have to come first when you're scheduling a school, because they're the most restrictive. Your opinion, teacher's opinion, don't matter. I know that's hard to accept, but that's the way of the world. When people pay, you dance to their tune. That's the way it works. This notion that teachers, that teachers have differing opinions, they can have differing opinions, but that has nothing to do with how we're going to implement and run this program. But Kristen made a great point, the same point that Liz made last night. Somebody's always the odd person out when we do dumb stuff like this, and they just quit. They go somewhere else. They won't have to put up with this. Teachers are not indentured servants, and nor should they be. And if they work for people who do dumb things and put them in bad situations, then they'll simply leave and go somewhere else. We have to make sure that we implement programs, especially federal programs, with fidelity. That's the beginning problem with this case study is our master schedule does not implement this program with fidelity as intended. And then it only gets worse after that. That's why you've heard me say, whoever makes the master schedule runs the school, period. And they won't worry about federal law, state law, local board policy. They won't worry about kids' safety. They won't worry about diversity, making sure everybody's got an equitable shot. They don't care about any of that. What makes my day go quickest and easiest? That's generally what people are most concerned about. All teachers aren't bad. I'm not trying to tell you that, but everybody likes to do what's good for them. It takes a lot of discipline to do the right thing, but what did they hire you for? They hired you to do the right thing. Your job mainly is to make sure to enforce laws and policies. And if teachers don't know how something's supposed to do, you're supposed to develop them to the point where they do. You're supposed to put them through professional development and train them on how to do the things the right way. I believe that's in the law in terms of principals, duties, and responsibilities of the principal. Is to train the faculty to make sure that they're doing the right things, to implement all laws and policies with fidelity. And so this case study is long and involved. It has a lot of pieces. Let's talk about the parent piece now. And that's the backside of the skip. Let's talk about the parent piece. I've belabored the point on the front half, which is the OMA, the master schedule, federal programs, all of those things. We've talked about EC. We know the difference. We know that we have to follow them. What about the parent piece? How are we going to deal with these parents now? So we're going to have a parent inclusion night where we're going to come in and we're going to train them on this stuff. What's going to be the content of it? Megan, how would you start this? How would you start this parent meeting on our inclusion program we'll say it's an elementary school? How would you start that parent meeting?
That's a good question. maybe describing the difference between the two models.
There you go. Here's what we've been doing for years. You know, this is the mainstream model that we've been using for the last 30 years. We're no longer using this model. The federal government now has shifted the funding and the emphasis from this, and they pay for this. This is not, make sure we understand, this is not a state or local financial initiative. The federal government pays for the teachers and sends the money for the program. We're not blaming anybody else, but understanding we don't have control. It's not like we're here to decide whether we want to do the old one or the new one. That's not within our purview. You have to explain that to parents up front, because when you call them to a meeting, they think that they're going to get to vote. There is no vote coming. You have to make that understood from the outset of the meeting, that this is not about deciding what you want or your opinion. That's what this case study was about, you know, about which point of view. There's only one point of view, the one the federal government funds. That's the only point of view there is. So is one more right than the other? Well, of course. One will keep you in compliance and keep the money coming, and the other won't. So when you have that meeting with your teachers and that meeting with your parents, the first thing you have to tell them, folks, there's not a choice here. This is not an either or. This is the current initiative. This is what is being funded now. These are the rules. That's the first thing that you have to explain to teachers when you lead them through the staff development to learn about the inclusion model. And then you're going to have to do more specific training with your regular ed teachers about what their role and how they deal with it inside the classroom. To Kristen's point, I mean, if they're overwhelmed, then you need to train them. But the first thing that you need to get them to understand is, you know, I'm not choosing to do this to punish you. This is the rules now. It used to be that way. Now it's this way. That's the way it goes. Things change in life. The only constant in life is change. Exceptional Children's Services delivery has now changed. This is what we do now. And you explain that fully to parents, and you explain it fully to teachers. And then the next step is you start training teachers to be able to implement that program and run it with fidelity. But the worst thing, where I'm headed with this, is the worst thing that you can do as a leader of any kind, especially a school leader, is to give people false decision-making capability, to make them think that they get to choose, hoping they'll pick the one that you want. What happens if they don't pick the one that you want? I was on the CMS calendar committee. Calendar is a big thing. And I used all of my influence, which was minimal. I was high school principal, but I was chair of the senior high principals. And so I only had a little bit, but I got on the calendar committee. I used that to get me a seat on the calendar committee, and I lobbied them, and I put pressure, and I twisted arms. And we started school 1st of August, and we finished the first semester before Christmas. Was a tremendous hit. Teachers loved it, parents, yeah, everybody loved it. It was just, you know. So, but the vacation lobby in North Carolina hated it. Charlotte being the biggest district at that time in the state, they hated it. That's why and so the next year we came in and we had, the traditional calendar that ended, that started, around Labor Day, and you had another month of school. You didn't start the second semester till up in February. And then we had the one where you started the 1st of August. And so we had the two calendars on the table. And the committee voted 100% to go with the the 2 semester where you started the 1st of August, and they said, well, no, that really wasn't an option. Well, why was it on the table then if it wasn't an option? Well, we was hoping you'd pick the other one. Well, everybody loved the 1st semester, 2nd semester, finish 1st semester by Christmas. Well, we really can't do that. Well, why can't we? Well, politicians don't like it. And so during that year, that's when the law was changed. Jeffrey knows this one from Charlotte. That's when the law was changed. You couldn't start till August 25th so that we could do that no longer. Because the 3 months, June, July, and August, are when beach rentals go up 4 times the normal amount. Vacation rentals that are $800 a week or $3,200 during those those 3 months. And they were losing out a month of the highest rental, which was, all of a sudden their rentals no longer paid the bills. They were losing money on their rentals. And so that's why the law wasn't passed, because for educational purposes. The August 25th was passed so that people would continue to go on vacation in August and rent those high priced beach houses. And so, but the superintendent and his staff lost complete credibility with the district when they said, oh, y'all voted 90-something% for this calendar, but we're not going to do it because it's, we're trying to keep the politicians happy.
But Dr. Lamb, you also have other districts who start earlier and who defy the law, and there's no repercussions to that.
There's no teeth in the law. You can start in the middle of July if you want to. There's nothing they can do to you.
Our calendar was just voted on in February, and teachers start August 1st at Winston Forsyth County, and students start August 12th.
Yeah.
And
I'd like that schedule.
Yeah.
But it's the time frame, like they voted February is starting, and lots, like you're saying, all of these people complain because they already have vacations scheduled. You do them in advance. So they've got this whole FAQ sheet about what to do if you've already scheduled a vacation and how you can get those days for the student to get them where they're not missing school. And I'm thinking, how can that be possible? Because the first 10 days of school is where the money, it's all tied together. If your student is not at school, but you're being excused because you're on vacation, I was like, I don't get that. I don't understand.
Well, now remembering that the money is not set. They set the staff and allot them to schools off the first 10 days. But now, you get paid for how many show up every month. That's just for allotment purposes, the 10 days. It's not your money for the year. You don't get money for the year. You get allotment, and and then after 20 days, you've seen schools move teachers around after 20 days. They can move them anytime during the year. They try not to, but they can move them around. But this is rich people problems. But yes, there's no penalty under the law if you start early. This was all about Charlotte Mecklenburg, about me, twisting their arm to have start early so we'd have first semester be done by Christmas because of testing. This was back when we first started EOC testing, and it was awful coming back for 3 weeks, and we would immediately have to go into review, and we lost so much instructional time because we'd been out for 2 weeks. And even I won't claim any credit. All the teachers and everybody came to me and said, this is awful with this new testing for end of course. Remember, end of course testing's not been around forever, folks. We didn't even have a state curriculum until 89. Y'all know the story. 83 basic ed plan said, get a basic ed. Somebody said, smart guy in the back said, what's basic education? Took to 89 to write it. And then it was 91 before we even started an accountability program, and it started in elementary. And we didn't even get to high school accountability till the late 90s. And that's when I was a high school principal. And all of a sudden I realized, boy, this is really, really bad. The way that this semester break is, where we have 3 more weeks or 4 more weeks left in the first semester. When we come back, we got to get them through the rest of the content and then stop and try to do review. And, it was just awful. It's killing our test scores were, teachers saying this is just the worst thing ever. So the whole push was, I didn't care about vacations. The whole push was to try to get first semester over where we could do first semester testing before we went home for the break. That was the whole notion there. I was trying to make decisions for educational purposes. Guess what you hired me to do? Was to try to educate these kids and get the most achievement out of them as possible. My job was to make a good number go up or a bad number go down, not to worry about how much money somebody was making on their rental properties. I don't give a hoot about that. I'm not in the rental property business. And so districts have finally figured out now, you need to start school and run school for school. And people with vacation properties and don't go on vacation, that's rich people problem. You'll figure it out. But we need to run school for school. That's your job as a school administrator. Jeffrey, you had your hand up, then we'll get to Randy.
I did have a question, not about the calendar, but about the allotment that you talked about, CMS, and then the North Carolina. Has that changed in the state, or is that a district?
It's a district. The state money comes after the first 20 days. Ever how many kids you had, you get paid for. The 10 and 20 days is for district allotments. They don't like moving teachers around. They allot you how many they think you're going to have in your building. The allotment is, here's how many teachers that the state's going to pay for this year based on our overall enrollment. Let's say they're going to pay for 11,000 teachers in Charlotte. How do we divvy those up? Well, we can only guesstimate how many in the spring are coming. And when we send you your allotment sheet for how many classes for you to do your master schedule based on this many third grade classes or this many high school English classes, you have to build your master around your allotment sheet.
Because there's been like,
but I've talked to,
talked to my principal, and then there have been like, we're actually losing teachers because our district is changing the way that they're doing some kind of poverty level part, and is not based off of.
But they're not doing it. They're not doing it with state paid teachers. They're doing it. Told you, Charlotte Mecklenburg adds another $4,000 or $5,000 per pupil and hires a lot of local teachers. I had a bunch of those. Even when I was a junior high principal in Charlotte, I had a bunch of those. What did they call them back then? Project Success teachers. Locally
Project Lift, right?
Yeah, there you go. They started out as Project Success and then became Project Lift. That is correct. Those are locally paid. And so, but you have an allotment of state teachers that comes to your district, and how you divvy them out to schools is based on enrollment so that you don't have overloaded classes. The state gives you X number of teachers based on your overall population of students, and then says, these are the class size limits that you can't exceed 28 or 30 or 32. And so we just have to guess. In statistics, we call it, when I teach doctoral statistics every spring, we call it a swag. And people say, well, what do you mean? What's a swag? It's a stupid, wild ass guess. That's what it is. We guesstimate how many people are going to be there. We just guess. There's no crystal ball here, folks. We just swag it. And we allot based on what we think is going to come. And at 10 days, if it doesn't look good, you're on notice that at 20 days, we're going to move those teachers. That means get out and beat the bushes and try to get them to come. You got 10 more days to do that. If not, we're going to move some of those allotted teachers, those state allotted teachers. Now, in addition to your state allotted, if you're in a high wealth district like Charlotte, you'll have a lot of extra teachers that are locally paid. Those are fluid. They do not go with a formula of any kind other than, whoever's hollered the loudest, you can get those. And so understanding that 10 and 20 day marks, that's a local thing for placement of those state teachers. That's not a state thing. The state pays you at the end of the month for how many kids you have. That's the deal. And so, but you guys swag it along the way and figured out, where they're going to be. Randy, you had a question?
Yeah, I mean, it was kind of just a story about what you talked about you trying to do, my county last year, going into this year, provided us with the opportunity to vote on 2 academic calendars. And then all of a sudden they chose a calendar that wasn't even an option. And, it was one that we started really early, and the goal was to get, dismiss the kids by, I think it was Memorial Weekend, instead of coming back to take the EOGs. Well, anyway, kind of like you said, the teachers were kind of all for it, but the parents actually ended up trying to sue the county and the camps and all that. And, I think we had that calendar, I think the first year back from COVID, where we ended up getting out really early. And, it was very, like you said, the parents loved it and all that. But we actually lost some teachers after that calendar issue, because they ended up going to, I think, some schools that were almost like year-round schools, where they have those breaks in between the school year instead of those 2 months and then coming back.
Yeah. And that's a good point. I've got a doctoral dissertation student that's looking at the year-round calendar, not based on academic performance, but based on staff retention. And the smart districts. Anybody on here from Wake? I don't remember. The smart districts throw in some year-round schools. Not because they get better academic performance, but because some teachers like that better than the traditional calendar, and that'll be an option, and it keeps them from going to another district that will offer them that option, where you're X number of weeks on, and then you get 3 weeks off. You get 3 weeks off. What is it? 3 times during the year, you get 9 weeks off, or 12, some of them. I've seen extended day. I've seen all kinds of things like that, not for the whole district, but for a school or two in a district for those people. But Randy's right. Sometimes you got 2 choices and they pick a third one. Well, why'd you worry us with vote when we were hoping you wouldn't pick one of those? Or don't do that. That's a really bad leadership trait, is to give people false decision making. Tell them what it has to be. We've morphed this, but calendar is the best example. But when you're talking about something that you have no control over, when somebody external that's funding it says this is how it has to be, don't say here are the choices, hoping they'll pick the one that the external funder says it has to be, because you never know how that's going to turn out. And so the worst thing that you can do is to go in and talk about mainstreaming versus inclusion as if the parents get to choose. They don't. The teachers don't get to choose. You don't get to choose. You need to explain the differences for illustrative purposes. It used to be this way. It's this way now. And, this is not a choice. This is what we're going to be doing now, because this is what is being funded. That's how you have to approach that with your parents. Now, in this particular case study, what the teacher is doing is wrong. Everything about the situation there, from the master schedule all the way through, is wrong. And so what you have to do in a case like that is know it's wrong, admit that it's wrong, and fix it. But to Kristen's point, how I started this rant tonight, if you pile them all in one room, not only are you violating the federal law and you're not in compliance, you're just going to run your teachers off. And that's not an option either. Or piling them all in on one teacher, and then, the only way that she can survive is to basically take advantage of the upper kids, and the middle kids get nothing but worksheets. That's the only way she can do this, because she's got so many EC kids in the room. This is bad from top to bottom. But we're supposed to be smart enough to figure out what is our core problem here. Our core problem is our master schedule, and that we haven't. And then we're not in the room. We're not training teachers. We're not informing parents. We're not doing anything. This is a complete, dereliction of duty in terms of what a principal said. This is not just something bad. This is not understanding. Whoever makes the schedule runs the school, and you get out of in your school what your schedule says you're going to get. And if it's out of compliance, then you're out of compliance. And so that's why, to end this rant tonight, that's why you got to start with your federal programs. That's why. This is the perfect example. I told you it would become clearer through the semester when we got to the last case study that it's not debatable. Those 5 things are not in that order, are not debatable. This is what happens when you don't do it that way. Now, in modern times, in the world that we live in today in public education, this principle would be out immediately. You can't survive this. You don't misspend federal money, but once the parents are up in arms, I mean, you will not survive something this bad, nor should you if it's this bad. But this is how it can get sideways on you. That one decision on, what's my priority going to be in scheduling the school? You make that bad decision, every decision after that's even worse. It just compounds your problem. It just compounds your problem. So I'm looking, in 2 weeks when we meet again, you present this one, I'm looking for you to be thoughtful in this one. You're supposed to impress me with everything that you've learned so far in the MSA program. You got to start thinking more globally. You can't just, think about little stuff. You got to start putting it all together and start making connections. Problem was master schedule, how it flows, that problem flows all the way through. What has to be done for federal programs, how EC works, how inclusion versus mainstream. We could have informed our parents. We could have kept them. We could have had a family inclusion night. We could have done professional development with our teachers. We could have done a lot of things along the way if we had been more intentional, understanding what we were getting ourselves into. And that's, I want you to be great administrators. I want you to be, I don't want you to be good. I want you to be great. And you have to know all the moving parts and how they all fit together and how doing this decision over here affects this over there. You got to be intentional about your work. You got to be intentional. And I'll circle back to Jeffrey's principal. She was the best beginning teacher I ever saw by a long shot. Nobody even close. She was the best one I ever saw. Saw a lot. When she was in the central office, she was the best director. I'm betting she's the best principal. But now I'll say this about her. You don't know Stephanie Showing Range, but I'll say this about her. She had, from first day that she walked in the building, freshly out of graduate school, brand new teacher, she could see the big picture from the first day. She was smarter than everybody else in the room and didn't try to impress you with that, but she could see the big picture from the very first minute. And you knew that about her. She's the best hire I ever made. And that's just complete luck that she got sent to me. She was the best hire I ever made. But she could see it. She knew what was going to happen. She didn't just focus on one little thing. You got to be that way. If you want to be successful, you've got to be that way. You've got to see how all these parts integrate. It's like a big jigsaw puzzle, how they all integrate. This case study brings everything from the last 2 courses that you've had and for the 4 evidences you had. It brings it all to bear. Some piece of this case touches everything that you've done. Everything. Impress me in 2 weeks. I hope you have a good Easter break. If I don't see you before Easter, hide your own eggs. All right. I'm having egg salad, ham, green beans. My wife's dying Easter eggs. She's went all out. She bought a little figurine with 2 rabbits on it. I mean, we're doing Easter big time this year at our house. So I hope I've even got an Easter. She maybe bring an Easter bunny to my man cave here, to my condo. I've even got an Easter bunny over here. So as we leave tonight, I'll show you my Easter bunny. I hope to get to see you in 2 weeks. Me and my bunny will say goodnight.
That's cute.
See you
Have
in
a
2
good
weeks.
one,
Thank
Dr.
you.
Lamb.
Bye-bye.
Okay. Bye-bye.